A very good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. I'm Sahi Nandini. I'm working as a senior research specialist at Wilmara Institute, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. This session is the second in education series, Broaden Your Horizon. With the world reeling under the throes of COVID-19, we have now to deal with increasing exposure to digital screens. In today's session, we will discuss about the digital eye strain with the eminent clinicians practicing across India. It is a great pleasure to introduce our panelists for today's session. We have with us our first panelist, Mr. Kiran Chella. He hails from city of Hyderabad, obtained his master's degree in optometry from South Gujarat University, and did his clinical fellowship from LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad. Mr. Chella worked in various capacities in prime ophthalmic practices, universities, and industry. Currently, he is the head of professional services at Brent Franklin, which is the largest hospital-based optical retail chain in India. Mr. Chella worked as faculty and associate optometrist at LV Prasad Eye Institute in cornea and contact lens services. He's a member of alumni of LV Prasad Eye Institute Optometry and Optometry Association of Telangana. His special interests lie in primary eye care, specialty contact lens, anterior segment, ophthalmic imaging, and myopia control. Our next panelist, Ms. Pooja Sarbajna, is finished her master's in optometry from Maastricht University and is also currently pursuing her PhD from the same university. Previously, she pursued genetic educating program from Pittsburgh University, Germany. She's currently working as a senior consultant optometrist and specializing in vision and behavioral therapy, and serves as head of the department in amblyopia, binocular vision, and cortical visual impairment department at Narayan Nethralaya, Bangalore. Our next panelist, Ms. Shivalika, has received her bachelor's degree in optometry and vision science from Chitkara University in collaboration with Shankar Eye Hospital in 2017. She then completed her postgraduate diploma in optometry and vision science for binocular vision, orthoptics, and neuro-optometry from Reinholden Institute of Optometry and Vision Sciences, LV Prasad Eye Institute. She is currently working in binocular vision, orthoptics clinic, and special needs clinic in Institute of Vision Rehabilitation at LV Prasad Eye Institute, and also has few publications in the same field. She is very research oriented, and her interests include study of binocular vision, amblyopia, and vision therapy. She also has presented and has been participating in various national and international conferences. Our last panelist today, Mr. Shrikant Masudpalli, pursued his master's in optometry from Chitkara University, obtained his bachelor's in optometry from Bharati Vidyapeeth College of Optometry, Pune. This has followed by postgraduate diploma in human resource management and has worked in national level assistant manager training and technical support in ophthalmic lens industry, and has trained many optometrists and opticians. In the past assignment, Mr. Shrikant was associated in India Vision Institute and was involved in conducting training programs and workshops. In between 2011 to 2014, he was in charge in international internship program at Institute and also associated with clinical training for optometry students and trainees at Bausch & Lomb School of Optometry. His area of interest include ophthalmic dispensing, training, and education. And he's currently developing an ophthalmic dispensing vertical at LV Prasad Eye Institute and looks after all the dispensing programs at Reinholden Institute of Vision Sciences. His collaborations and projects included higher order aberrations with and without spectacles and on tinted lenses and stereo acuity. He also worked with Dr. Clifford William Brooks in Indiana University, USA, to upgrade his skills in ophthalmic dispensing. Thank you all for making time today for the panel discussion, and I greatly appreciate all the participants who joined for this education series. We have put together some frequently asked questions about digital eye strain and ocular health. And our first question is to Mr. Kiran Chella. Mr. Kiran, can you define computer vision syndrome and what is digital eye strain?
Yeah, hi everyone. As we know, we struck in a pandemic, and I felt this is important topic to be discussed. So before that, so we all, because of pandemic, we have to follow the certain norms like physical distance, social distancing kind of thing. So in a need of hour. So what we are trying to do is we are working on digital gadgets, work from home, telemedicine, online consultations, and online shopping. Everywhere we are occupied with online. Okay, so before that, we need to also understand how it is important for us to educate masses and common public and practitioners to importantly to manage computer vision syndrome. Okay, so we are very fortunate to have these digital devices to connect and give all productivity. However, there are some physical associations, side effects with the digital technology. So computer vision syndrome, aka what we call is digital eye strain, is also described as a eye and visual related symptoms with prolonged use of computers and digital tablets and e-reading, mobiles, etc. So we don't have any confined definition for it. However, so because we also consider it is as a ocular fatigue syndrome in some school of thoughts, it is also called as digital eye strain and also called as repetitive strain disorder. Okay, so it is important for us to know about computer vision syndrome, and we don't have any confined definition to it. So each specialty also, other than vision related, it is also combined with musculoskeletal symptoms. So we don't have any confined. So in ophthalmology or eye related, we call it as a new definition, call it as digital eye strain.
Thank you. That's a good elaboration on the definition. But can you tell us what is the prevalence of computer vision syndrome and how it's affecting different age groups?
As we know, in a recent report, what we saw is there is a massive surge of usage of internet and also usage of online computers and even mobile consumption. So the report says there are 820 million people are using internet globally. Okay, that's a massive increase. And every year it is accounting more than 1.5 million is adding to the account. Okay, so if you see this global report, it is showing that around 70 to 80% of prevalence of computer vision syndrome are digital eye strain. Okay, however, in other countries like Malaysia, Singapore, it is going to 90%. So in India, what we have recently saw the report saying that it's a 50 to 70%. It's very unlikely that we are underreporting it. Sometimes we need to see into future studies also.
And how is the difference in age groups?
So age group, what we see, the recent study says that there is 60% of online classes for children. It starts from 3 to 8 years. And again, it is increasing more in 8 to 14 years. And approximately there is 80% of population we are actually using in adult population also. But we don't have any confined report on prevalence of adult population like from 40 to 80, 70, 75. Still, there is a lacking in that population.
That's. And what is the role of an optometrist in computer vision syndrome in diagnosis and management?
So optometrist plays a vital role. However, we need to understand there is a lot of multidisciplinary approach we need to place into role. So optometrists are first line to defend the visual problems or ocular problems. However, there are some other associated factors like mental health, and also we need to understand there are also systemic conditions like musculoskeletal problems. So we need a basic approach, holistic approach. Proper history taking is quite important when you have a lot of visual demands. Nowadays, every person or every kid of all age groups, visual demands are very high. So we need to have a proper history taking, like not routine one. We need to consider more questionnaire kind based, like fatigue, like strain, like even dryness kind. What is the kind of headaches? We need to have a lot of questionnaires based, and also we need to assess refraction, visual acuity, And also there are kind of astigmatics which are actually not using glasses. So we need to correct them properly. And based on, again, I'm talking about more of, this is more of occupational, we need to consider their work demand.
Okay, great. That's a good elaboration on the question. Ms. Pooja, can you tell us if the eye responds to printed text similarly to the text on the digital screen?
No, Nandini. It's like the eye does not respond to the printed text similarly to the digital screen, because the viewing distance and the angle what we used for, and the different that results are different when it's a digital screen and when it's a text. The additional effort of focusing on the digital screen and the requirement of muscles to focus on the digital screen, like it is an add-on effect, and the visual demand will be more. The visual system demand will be more to read the text in the digital system.
Great. Because you mentioned about the viewing distance, can you tell us what is an appropriate viewing distance?
So we advise to do at least a 33 to 40 centimeter, not closer than that, but maximum time when the posture matters, because they are nowadays it's work from home or schools also online classes and all that. So the kids are lying down on bed and trying to use the laptops and all. So we basically tell them to sit in a proper position and take a proper table and then keep the computer at least a 33 to 40 centimeter distance. We advise them to keep it on.
Is it same with the printed text, like with the textbooks or newspaper?
Yeah, the viewing distance, like it's good to keep it in 33-40 centimeter, but print text and all the text what we are doing in a print text and what is a digital medium, the focusing require more because of all the focusing require more on the digital systems and all, because of the font size and all that. So we tell them to more not on like if we are advising also the kids that you have to read. We will tell them that if they can convert that into books and all and they read more, that will be better.
Okay, that's great. Can you also mention what is the most reliable diagnostic tool for computer vision syndrome?
Okay, so as an optometrist, the things are like what first we should do. First, we should do a proper refraction and as a primary eye care, a proper refraction and give a proper spectacle and go for ortho-optics assessment. So as it's for a general population also, so ortho-optics assessment means we need to assess all the eye muscles, that for the muscles which helps us to see the nearer objects and all, and which helps us to move our eyes. Entire muscles we have to evaluate, and we have to see that any lag is there or not on that. And then we have to see their mental health, their proper posture, entire thing, and then we have to come to a diagnosis, and then we have to manage it with different kind of exercises or the glasses or whatever.
When you are mentioning exercise, one thing that comes into my mind is about the blink rate, and that is most often it's very important, and most of them complain about the blink rate. What is a normal blink rate, Pooja?
So it's around 12 to 15 per minute.
Okay, and why is it important?
It's very important for the tear film levels of the eye. So basically the tear film to protect the ocular eye surface, that is very important. And if they are having inadequate blink rates, so it can result different. It will not moisture the like the anterior part of the eye, and it can cause tiredness, dry eye, itching, irritation, and all of that.
And does computer vision syndrome affect by the blink rate?
Yes, it affects because see, when we are talking about blink rate, so our eyelids, so different kind of nerves are basically holding our eyelids. The oculomotor nerve and the facial nerves, that helps us to blink, correct? And then spontaneously lid closure happens either by reflex or by voluntary control. And then mainly what happens, it will helps us for the cognitive processing. So cognitive processing impact our blink rate. So if you're not blinking properly, then the eye surfaces will have problem, and obviously it will cause you computer vision syndrome, because blink rate is related to computer vision syndrome. We can go into different kind of accumulative relative issues or convergence relative issues. Everything depends on that.
When you mentioned cognitive processing, what did you exactly think about?
So cognitive processing having different impact of blinking rate with more active of this mental taxing activities such as memorizing, such as mathematic competitions. It's require a high blink rate.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Actually. Mr. Shrikant, I would like to know, how do ergonomic factors contribute to computer vision syndrome? Sorry.
So ergonomics is a science of work, or the Greek literal translation tells that it is laws of science. But in our context, we are talking about the science related to the work atmosphere. So where a human being interacts with the objects around. So definitely this would play a very important role in a lot of musculoskeletal issues, or eye strain and all. So most of the times when we use gadgets, it is not a single gadget that we use. So simultaneously we use several gadgets, like say while watching a television, we either use laptop, or we also use mobile screen for going to the text messages and things like that. So the distances vary, and several years ago, the demand of your head position and your position on the systems are a little different in that per se. But we are not using for things like that. And most of the time we use it on couches or on beds, and the position, especially the neck position on the couches, would matter a lot. And also the distances. The smaller the screen size, closer the distance is what is seen. And for mobile screens, especially, it is around 30 to 35 centimeter distance. And there is something called as head declination and eye declination, which means that when you are viewing the screen, how much is your head moved downwards, and how much is your eye gazed down. So those angles are very important. Previously, when the paper media was present, that time the angles were much less. But because of the gadgets now, the eye declination is more than that. And this increases again as you use smaller gadgets. So it is around 25 degrees downwards is what your shift would be. And also how you sit on the table and the chair. If you look at our Indian scenario I'm talking about, the average table height and the chair height are not to the standards of the anthropometry of Indian population. So that is slightly higher, and always when we sit on chairs and when we work on table, there's always the issue with our wrist and elbow positioning on the table. And also when you keep your legs on the floor, you try to reach it, and you probably would keep some angle of the feet to the floor. So what would be the ideal is keeping the screen, center of the screen, around 15 degrees below your eye level. And to a certain extent, that is what is science says. But practically, if you keep your neck and head turned downwards for longer duration, then you would have too much of neck pain. And sometimes you may have to lift your mobile up and see, keeping your head straight. So that would again relieve a lot of neck related issues. And there is something called as text neck, where because of continuous usage of your gadget, you always tend to keep your head forward and downward. So that is the posture that habituates because of continuous usage of the gadget. Apart from the head and neck position and the eye gazes and the screen position, it is also important that you keep your spinal cord straight and perpendicular to the floor, and your upper arms should be perpendicular to the floor, and your forearms, hands and wrist should be again perpendicular to the upper arms, and your legs should be again parallel to the floor, and your lower legs should be again perpendicular to the floor. And that's how you actually should position. And you should also make sure that there are no sharp edges, especially at the elbows and at the wrists while you are typing something on the keyboard. So ideally, you should not be placing your palm or hands on the keyboard while you're typing. So that is the most common mistake that we all do. We just keep our palms on the keyboard and then we type in. So usually you have to keep your forearms in the air, and then you should just use your fingertips to type in. So these are a few things related to posture and all, which would help you in avoiding the musculoskeletal issues, and also the microenvironment that we need to discuss, especially with regards to the humidity. So if the humidity is less than 40%, again it affects the precorneal tear film. So we should be mindful of the humidity of it, and also the air drafts, because when your room temperature is high, there will be inflow of air from outside, and then if the air gets heated up, then that would rise up, and then there will be a lot of humidity changes during or around your work atmosphere, and that could increase the osmolarity of the tears, and then that would lead to some inflammatory changes in the eye. So these are with regards to ergonomics, and of course it is very difficult to follow the 100% compatible or compliance to whatever the standards are, but having these guidelines would help us to decrease the neck pains as much as possible.
Thanks for a good explanation on that, Mr. Srikanth. Can you also elaborate on the importance of ambient lighting conditions?
Okay, so lighting conditions, actually ambient is one thing that would affect, and also the screen brightness. So these two things go hand in hand. Ambient light is again very important, and if it is too much, also would affect the person in terms of ocular or visual per se. There would be a there is something called as visual hygiene, where you need to maintain the optimum surrounding ambient light. That is important. And if you go with too much light, then that would probably be bleaching the text that you are looking at, and there will be a lot of glare issues that are present. And one must also make sure, theory says that if your ambient light is red or green, that actually will be more bothersome. And if your ambient light is slightly white or bluish, then that is actually more pro or very ease for the eyes. So the ambient light again, especially should not be directly hitting your eye. And if you want to know actually whether ambient light is affecting your performance, you just have to keep your palms and around the eyes and check whether you feel comfortable. So if that happens, if you feel comfortable by that small test that you do in front of the screen, you need to probably think of altering the ambient light. So only thing is, any light that directly enters into the eye, apart from the one that comes from the screen, is definitely be affecting the contrast levels, and also might to a certain extent affect the color perception, because it bleach the screen. So yeah, so these are the things related to ambient light. And with regards to the screen illumination itself, again, if there is a difference of ambient light versus the screen brightness, which is if your screen brightness is 3 times more than the ambient light, that again cause discomfort glare. And we should be mindful of that. And most of the youngsters and trainees or whoever is using gadgets for reading, for learning, those people would spend a lot of time in the dark rooms, especially on the couches or beds in the night, or also while socializing, by turning the lights off. So that again increases the ratio between the foreground and the background illumination, and that causes lots of discomfort. And that exposure would affect a lot. And one point I just missed regarding the ergonomics is using laptops. So laptops are not actually supposed to be put on laps for a long time. So it itself would have a lot of consequences. It would affect the fertility of the male individual if it is for a longer duration, and the low electromagnetic frequency affects health. Sometimes it might cause dermatitis and rashes on the skin, but again, it's for short period of time that matter. Coming back to the illumination, yes, there are several ways of doing that. You can actually keep glare filters on the screen, which will actually decrease the glare coefficient, reflection coefficient, and there are a lot of reflections of the light sources which are around, and these light sources are seen on the screen. And in order to look at that particular objects which are present, or maybe that sometimes your focus will keep changing from what you actually intend to do, and based on the reflections that are available, and that actually would change your accommodation levels from around 1/4 diopter to 2 diopters, again, based on the science that is available. So we should again make sure that your that angles of the screen are not tilted too much. It should be tilted in such a way that it maintains the ergonomics which are suggested. And at the same time, if the angles that you tilt, or the height at which you keep the screen, if that is not working to decrease reflections of the surface, then then probably you should work with this glare filters, and this would also decrease the glare coefficient from the surface. And while we actually look at the screens, I mean, it's not about the contrast that would actually change a lot, but what causes is accommodative micro fluctuations, and I'm sure Shivalika would probably be talking about it, and maybe if required, then we can comment upon that. And the screens what we most commonly use are like LCDs and TFTs. Very subtle difference between these two, but the refresh rate again is very important. So the study has taken 3 components. There is accommodative microfluctuations, contrast sensitivity, and critical flicker fusion frequency. So if I mean, what is more bothersome is again accommodative microfluctuations that would happen because of the continuous screen gazing, and these illumination changes would also affect the reflections on the surface, would also affect the accommodation. So I just leave it to that, and I would leave the rest for Shivalika to comment when her turn comes up, probably because it is her forte.
Yeah, sure. But as in we are talking about the light condition, it just pops up one more question to me. What about people who are working outdoors and also using digital screens? What is the important light conditions there?
So when we actually use screens outdoors, when usually again because of the busy schedules, classes are going on, or maybe when you are at office, when you take a break and when you come out of your rooms and all, immediately if your screen is not set for auto brightness adjustment, then you would not probably see anything on the screen. So you may have to increase the screen brightness to see that. And if you have not done that, probably you will struggle to do even change, and that is important. But of course, it is not suggested to use gadget in the very bright ambience. As I said, that too much bright ambient light also would affect the eyes, because that would again bleach the screen, or it would have its effects in terms of reflections and glare. So we should be avoiding it. And a lot of if you are using it outdoors, maybe you should also think of the UV rays that probably would hit after hitting the surface of the screen. So that would be add on to other light pollution that would happen.
That's great. All right. Sivalika, can you tell us what is the relation between computer vision syndrome and myopia?
Hello, hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are, Sivalika.
Hi.
Thanks.
Firstly, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the team Hello for inviting me for this panel discussion. It's been really good so far. There's a lot of people telling so many things, and I think everybody needs to know about it. So, so far in this panel, we've been discussing and talking mostly about computer vision syndrome. That's basically a digital eye strain. The term can be used interchangeably, but we've been dealing with computer vision syndrome on a personal level as well as in our eye care practices. Now you're suddenly asking that, oh, how relationship between myopia and computer vision syndrome, where did myopia even come from? Why suddenly myopia? So, apart from the overall effect COVID has had on our mental as well as physical health for an individual, as an eye care practitioner, it's also important to keep this in mind that apart from the adults that are working on computer systems, working from their home for 8 to 10 hours a day, there are children who are still at home attending online classes, spending more time on mobile phones, laptops, and indoors. So they have fewer activities that happen outdoors. Now, spending more time indoors and having fewer activity outdoors are known risk factors for myopia onset or a progression or myopia progression in children who are already being diagnosed as having myopia. Now, this being said, not everyone is going to develop myopia with CVS or progress in it. There is good amount of awareness that is being carried out. The literatures are being published on, creating awareness for children, teachers, parents, caregivers, social workers, for understanding the predictions of rise in myopic air refractive error. So we are dealing with COVID pandemic, but we are also dealing with a slower progression of myopia as a pandemic. If I might even go ahead and call it as quarantine myopia, now that it's developing due to excessive near work. Now it has found a place in our lives. So we could expect the increase in numbers, specifically in children. Now, anyone who uses gadgets excessively, we are not taking breaks in between, will present with eye strain and muscle issues as a part of digital eye strain spectrum. Now, this would demand for us to reassess the refractive errors on the children who are already sitting with refractive errors or have never been diagnosed. So, to sum it up, I think my answer would be yes, CVS is definitely related with myopia, but it will not necessarily cause myopia. Okay, but would be present mostly in association with it. If you think about it, it actually is the sustained near work and the closer working distance with the digital device usage in the current pandemic that could be causing both in relation.
That's a great start, Sivalika. Before I move on to the current research trends about the diagnosis or management, Mr. Shrikant, can you actually tell us if there is actually any standard protocol for diagnosis and management that we have for computer vision syndrome? Okay. Or we can use this time if Shivalika want to continue, if there are any current research trends.
Current research, could you just repeat your question?
Also, I was asking if there are any current research trends or how the research trends are now in diagnosis and management of computer vision syndrome.
Yeah, so we have been talking and we've been dealing with computer vision syndrome. The constant near work demands the constant near work while we are doing it demands our eye to always remain in the state of accommodation. That means we are using our eye muscles more than what we are supposed to use in our daily life, because we as a humans are basically hunters and gatherers. We are not the ones who are supposed to sit at one place and be on our phone for the most of the time. So this creates an extra strain on your ocular muscles. Okay, and for this, we don't need a very hi-fi system to diagnose it. The current literature always suggests the same thing, that anybody who's coming to you with, asthenopic symptoms such as headache, eye pain, eye strain, heavy eyelids, watering of eyes, and cannot focus on a printed text for a longer time. So all these complaints, anybody who comes in with all these complaints can be mostly, I say 99% of time has computer vision syndrome. So there's not a very hi-fi system to diagnose for somebody having a computer vision syndrome. But yeah, as far as the management is concerned, I personally, in my practice, follow a sequential approach. The first approach, I think Pooja already touched up on this. She said, first and foremost step for correcting even CVS is your correcting of refractive error. The refractive error correction is the first and foremost step. And then you can perform a detailed, binocular vision examination. So binocular vision examination is basically, examining how well both your the eye muscles of both your eyes are working in coordination and properly. And depending upon it being accommodation as an issue or divergence as an issue, or both together, we would treat it depending upon how severe it is with the vision therapy. So we call the patients for in-office vision therapy, we provide them with that, and most of them do recover well. Now, this being said, we should not forget that digital eye strain, it's an umbrella term, which would include your dry eye as another component. Even though we are treating everyone, giving refractive error, treating binocular vision examination, we should not, forget about there is association of dry eye along with CVS. So proper dry eye evaluation and then referring to the concerned ophthalmologist for the management would be another thing to do. So that is the current research trend that we had, basically just evaluating how a person's symptoms would be while usage of electronic devices.
Great. Hi, Shrikant.
Yeah, hi Nandini.
Hi.
Sorry
So
about that.
I know
Sometimes
that's okay. That's totally understandable. So we were just discussing about the diagnosis and management of computer vision syndrome. Would you like to add on the current available management and diagnosis?
I mean, I am sure that Shivalika have covered all the important points, but a very good way of eliciting history is very, very important for the eye examination. And of course, we also should keep in mind that there could be several other factors which probably would be contributing to the problem. So we should probably rule out what are those, and whether it is actually digital eye strain or something else is contributing to that. Sometimes a migraine could be another problem. I mean, we had an experience that one of our colleague was continuously using gadgets, and that screen light, or because of the continuous usage of that light, he has a triggering factor of migraine by looking at intensity of light. And because of that, is not able to keep the screens on, and he always only speaks through mic. So we should understand the intensity of the problem, and probably if the migraine is treated, then probably he would be able to again come back to that, and that should not be considered as only digital eye strain. So there are several factors which would contribute for the problems, like say headache. There are several reasons, and we should actually find out the source of the problem. So thorough eye examination, refraction, and there is something called as near work induced transient myopia. And I hope again, the panelists might have discussed about it. So again, if this is what is noticed in the refraction that you do, and when you see that there is a shift towards myopia, or increase in minus power, or a decrease of hyperopic correction they have, then probably we should first think of usage of the gadgets and how long they are using and all. and that helps in in giving the spectacle correction. And yeah, if it is only related to eye test and diagnosis, as a good slit lamp examination again.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point here. So Shivalika and Srikanth was discussing about dry eyes. Okay, so most of the time our optometrists who actually evaluating the patient, many of the times what we see is we are actually ignoring these dry eyes. The patient complaints might be different, like discomfort, might we have to correlate, investigate properly. So basic dry eye test like shimmer test, which we can call quantitative, qualitative, we can measure it. And one more thing is TBUT. So tear film backup time, with normally looking in the child time only, we can assess it. So based on that, what kind of symptoms we can correlate properly, and you also make them educate. What is the importance of blinking same time? So what usually happens is they don't tend to blink much. So as Pooja mentioned, like 15 to 18 is quite important. So what we noticed is when we are talking to the patients or something, they have very less blink rate. That's called altered blink rate. So usually altered blink rate will have evaporative dry eyes. So on slit lamp examination, try to measure tear meniscus and also see the tear film quality. What kind of tear film it is flowing very well, or we have good tear meniscus, and if we have seen any dry spots, even without fluorescein, we can able to appreciate it very much. So that's quite important. Rather than like if you have time, we can also assess with OCTs and kind of thing. But it's a lot of it takes time. So same time, educating patients is quite important. And as we know that these things are quite underreporting. So we have a lot of opportunity here to optometrists have a lot of opportunity to create, this investigative patterns, practice patterns for, dry eyes and also digital eye strain. We can have a cumulative approach. We can have some guidelines like dry eyes and also vision therapies and also binocular vision. And Srikanth has explained about ergonomics. Okay, so this kind of approach should be very important, and we need to put it on. And Srikanth also mentioned about neck and spondylocervical. So what we noted is one of the patients, probably presbyopes, also using gadgets and computers, they don't have proper education. So because of the focusing issues, they are actually altering their font size. But however, they don't have proper guidelines on using bifocals, and they also tend to have cervical or lumbar spondylitis. So optometrist plays a very important role to guide them what kind of prescription, what kind of occupational need they need. Basically simple, planning progressive lenses with all this measuring all binocular anomalies and all those things will probably be actually delaying this spondylitis actually. Okay, so this is quite important area. Definitely we need a holistic approach. Coming to the dryness part, we need to quantify it. So sometimes if you have time, measure with staining, where we have different staining patterns, whether evaporative dry eyes or a kind of thing, whether they have meibomian glands dysfunction or meibomian glands blockage, which will aggravate more dryness to the digital usage.
Because we are progressing, sorry, if somebody wants to add anything, please go ahead.
Nandini, I want to add one point on the management part, that nowadays what basically we advise for the kids who all are doing like online classes and who all are like work from home and all that. So just not huge binocular vision exercises. We will just advise them to switch from distance to near. So just look far and wait for like 10-15 seconds and come back to your screen, or you can keep a calendar far and read 2-3 letters of that and switching off. And we advise many a time that to use a flipper to just stimulate and relax. That will help them to get their binocular vision thing. So it's a simple tips that we give to every kids and every computer users.
I think
And
that's a
just
great
along,
point. Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah. So
and
yeah, I
along
just.
with
Uh-huh.
that, I'd just like to add one more thing to what just Pooja said. Along with the, giving them exercise of, shifting their gaze from near to far, the other thing that we mostly tell our patients for who come with digital eye strain is using of 20-20-20 rule.
Yeah.
So that is very important. I think most of my patients have felt really, really better after, following that 20-20-20 rule. So just to put it out there, this rule is for after every 20 minutes, take a break for 20 seconds and look 20 feet away. And nowadays there are computer systems who have come with this software that they blank your screen for those 20 seconds for that you can look far away. So that actually helps, lower down the symptoms of the patients. Yeah, you
That's
can
very
continue, Nandini.
interesting to no, that's okay. I was just saying that's very interesting to know that there's so much detail in very small things. Yeah.
Yes.
I've noticed that we are moving our discussion towards management part. So I just want to know if there are any treatment options in terms of coatings, contact lenses, and medical management. Everybody is our panelists today. All of you are in clinical practice. So if you want to add on it, we can start with Kiran.
Nandini, I think before that, let Srikanth add about ophthalmic lenses, then I can add to it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'll take that suggestion. Mr. Srikanth, you can talk.
Thank you, Kiran, for forwarding that. Yeah, I mean, in terms of ophthalmic lenses that we give, there are two things that we should consider. I mean, rather three things actually to consider. One is coatings, and second thing is correction. So before talking about these three, Kiran was mentioning about looking at the monitor, especially bifocal users. So what they would actually try to do is because that comes in intermediate distance, whatever gadgets they use. So when they wear bifocals, they have to raise their chin up and then go close to the monitor, because that now brings up into this near working distance range, which is corrected through the bifocal segment. And that awkward position would again cause a lot of neck related problems, and it looks very odd when someone is trying to do that. So I would start with the solution for such kind of situations. So people who are using bifocals can be counseled on the options available in terms of correcting distance, intermediate and near, that is through a progressive addition lens. And sometimes progressive addition lens dispensing would be a little challenging in some corrections and additions and the kind of design that they choose based on the astigmatic correction they have. So for those people, there is something called as occupational progressive addition lens. And again, study says that most of the practitioners do not talk about this lens to their clients. And again, as an optometrist, it is our responsibility and a duty to give the options that are available. And along with the progressive addition lens, so the occupational progressive addition lens should be given as a extra pair. So that would be used only for intermediate and for near work. And this expands the field of view in the work atmosphere. So because you are chopping out the distance portion and you are providing them with the only intermediate and near correction, so they would enjoy that wider field of view through the lenses. So these things should be suggested, and there are so many lenses out there in market where you can actually learn from the vendors, and then you can learn from them which one is good for which kind of prescription or what they prefer. So most of the time nowadays, people are using anything around the arm's length. So, even those preferences are also considered while giving that correction. And apart from that, for pre-presbyopes, and because the continuous work on the system, again, as I was talking about accommodative microfluctuations, there is a study which is done and found that after a certain period of time, each age group, irrespective of the age group, especially above 16 and 20, and before 40 years of age, again, for each 10 years age gap, they have understood that how this accommodative microfluctuations happen, and what is the amount or what is the dioptric support that should be given through the spectacle lenses. And these lenses are called as anti-fatigue lenses. And I mean, people who are listening to this accommodative micro fluctuations for the first time, if I have to make it easier to you guys to understand, imagine that you are holding a 10 kg bag in your hand and you are supposed to hold it for a day long. And what you would imagine to happen. So initially, depending on each person's physique and their stamina and capabilities, maybe that someone would be holding it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and any individual, even the gym freak would be probably getting strained over a certain period of time. So maybe after an hour, even if you stretch it. So after that, what happens if you try to hold it in the same position, like perpendicular, your arm being parallel to the floor? So you start having tremors, right? So the gravity pulls the bag down and you try to hold it in its position because that is what is the task that you are supposed to do. So these tremors would happen. So which means that the distance between the floor and the arm is keep changing, and you try to maintain that. So exactly the same thing would happen when you are trying to look at the gadget for longer duration. And after a certain period of time, then these changes in the accommodation would happen because you are not able to sustain the accommodation for that particular distance. And then the study understood that, okay, there should be some support given for this. And that's how these pre-presbyopic lenses or anti-fatigue lenses have come into market. Predominantly, it would have only near addition. It would not have intermediate correction into that. And that would help relieving a lot of near vision related problems which are related to accommodation. So one is occupational progressive duration lens. The second thing is for people who need support in terms of accommodation for pre-presbyopes. And again, because this all happens improper diet or junk food, so definitely these all would the factors, and lack of exercises and increased screen time. And coming to the coatings, I mean, there are several coatings available, and people say that blue light protective lens coat is very, very important. That's what market or the manufacturers say. But again, this is all calculated or estimated values that are available, but there is no research done on human eyes. But always, like, what would you do if it is a cloudy day and if you are supposed to step out, not being into four-wheelers? So you prepare for that and you step out, right? So there's no harm in wearing these blue light protective coats. And the blue light protective doesn't mean that it would stop all the light transmission. And even in the blue wavelength, if you take the bandwidth of say around 400 nanometers to 490 nanometers, it is around 40 nanometer bandwidth ranging from 415 to 455 nanometers that is harmful to the eyes. That's what again the literature says. So we should be protecting or filtering these this specific bandwidth through the spectacle lenses. So there are lenses available in the market, but that would again differ. Some would only filter the lens and some lenses would block the lens. So blocking the blue light means that you are also stopping the essential blue that is needed for maintaining the circadian rhythm or sleep-wake cycle and the moods that would change. So for that, again, you need blue turquoise, which is above 450 nanometers to until 490 nanometers. And that is very, very important for you to have your good routine. So always we should suggest blue filtering lenses over blue blocking lenses. And if anyone brings a controversy, because even the consumers nowadays are very smart, they Google before they come to your practice, and then just want to check your knowledge. So you should be mindful even of that, and probably sometimes you may have to demonstrate them what is blue filtering lenses and what is blue blocking lens, and counseling them, saying that if there is a there is no scientific evidence saying that this would be helpful for individuals who wear blue filtering lenses, but you can say that always this is just you're preparing for that, even if it doesn't work for that particular purpose, but at least it would work for the reflections on the surface. So it would still act as an anti-reflective coat for that matter. And there is hardly any difference between a normal sophisticated anti-reflective coatings versus blue light protective or blue reflective or blue filtering lens coats. So that is the coatings regard one need to talk about. I mean, with the patients especially, what I mean.
Very well explained, Srikanth. That was very helpful. Other panelists, do you want to add anything on the medical management in terms of eye drops or anything that we missed?
Nandini, I just want to add once to the Srikanth. So Srikanth has covered about ophthalmic lenses, and we also report so many uncorrected refractive error patients because that aggravates actually problem then they come to reporting to the clinic. So it is important now to correct all population to address this thing. That is quite important now. And coming to the contact lens, we just prefer to give low decay lenses. In high decay lenses, we do have para-operation kind of thing. So the chance of dryness will be more. So or else we have a practitioner replacement lenses. We need to observe giving high decay lenses and close follow-up. And also nowadays we have daily disposable lenses based on patient feasibility. We can choose it. And secondly, what think is like once we correct them and proper guidance after vision therapy and binocular vision anomalies, correcting with proper prescription, always educate the patient. Okay, so ask them to blink much with some quotations or reminders. We have so many apps now to remind us to blink. Okay, so kind of thing, and also put them on artificial tears. We all have a very good preservative artificial tears for comfort's sake, and moreover educating and proper ergonomics is quite important.
Yeah, sometimes technical glitches also bring in the reminders of breaks, like what happened to me several minutes ago.
Just to add to what Srikanth and Kiran said, that correcting refractive error is very important. Most of the patients who come to your clinic for regarding symptoms of CVS would be the pre-presbyopic age, mostly, is what I've observed till now. And the pattern that I found in those pre-presbyopic cases reporting with computer vision syndrome would be the uncorrected hyperopia. The small amount of uncorrected hyperopia, which is enough for them to cause those small micro fluctuations in the accommodation, because they're almost reaching they are almost trying to reach that presbyopic age 40. They're about to hit 40. They're still somewhere in that gray zone where they don't know what to do with their accommodation. They're spending more time on screen, and these patients usually end up getting addition powers before what they're supposed to do. So my advice on doing how to manage those cases would be doing a cycloplegic refraction. Okay, it's not going to cause harm to anyone to just go ahead and do cycloplegic refraction. As per what I think is, cycloplegic refraction should be done irrespective of the age, because you never know who's accommodating how much. And since we are in the era of digital eye strain, these pre-presbyopic patients are the only ones who feel so much better just with that small hyperopic correction. Most of the symptoms go away with that. So correcting those, plus 0.75 or a +1 type of hyperopic correction for these patients makes a lot of difference. Then we think that okay, ignoring it wouldn't make it, would do nothing. But yeah, giving that uncorrected small amount of hyperopia makes a lot of difference. That's what I would like to add to that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Shivalika. Just recalling back from your earlier explanations when you mentioned estenopic symptoms. So can we correlate that estenopic symptoms can also come from uncorrected hyperopia?
Yes, I would say yes, because estenopic symptoms are what really? Patients coming to you complaining that I'm not able to read for a longer time. Hyperopia does our textbooks do define hyperopia as something where our accommodation is at rest and we are not able to see for near vision is reduced in hyperopia, but that's not the case. That's not what we see in the clinic. Somebody with hyperopia might have N6 vision and 20/20 for distance, so that the only thing that they might complain for while coming to you would be, I have headache while reading, I cannot read for a longer time, specifically when I shift my gaze from distance to near, it suddenly gets blur and it's clear again. Okay, so that process of you trying to our accommodation system trying to compensate for that particular amount of hyperopia is going to get fatigue at one point of time. Okay, how much ever you can try to do at one point of time, you will get tired of doing that. So how I explain to my patients is that they come and say, I'm able to read for distance, why are you giving me this correction? I don't need it. Hyperopia doesn't necessarily means you are not N6. Okay, you can be N6 and you can be 20/20, but you would still need that small amount of plus or whatever amount of plus there would be.
That's a good point.
So just giving them correction is more than enough.
Yes. Shrikant, you want to add something?
Yeah,
So I want to add one more point. I want to add one more point in Shivalika's thing that, hello?
Yes, Pooja, we can hear you.
Yeah, so we don't do much of cycloplegic refraction because, yeah, sometimes patient needs cycloplegic refraction, but it's difficult to do cycloplegic refraction because 3 days blur and explaining them, it's difficult. So in that case is what we do a good, obviously retinoscopic refraction and all that, and we do binocular balancing. We do diochrome test and we do binocular balancing, and we try to push them maximum plus number instead of doing cyclo. Yeah, we do cyclo, but all the cases cyclo is not possible. So we do binocular balancing and give glasses.
That's a great point, Pooja. Shrikant, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I thought when it comes to concluding remarks, I would give that. But yeah, I mean, when we are actually examining the patient, we probably have to classify the symptoms into 4. That is ocular, visual, and then SNOPIC symptoms, these 3, and ergonomic related. So once we segregate this, I think we will be able to actually ask specific questions related to these 4. And then we should be able to again offer solutions accordingly. So wherever the problem lies, so you would probably counsel or try to approach for that particular area.
Great.
Sorry, that was not ergonomic, musculoskeletal. So
that's fine. Just recalling back again, when Shrikant was mentioning the accommodation microfluctuation, Pooja, you are also in clinical practice. Do you have any take on it? Any other further explanation?
See, for accommodative relative things, what we do basically, obviously, as Shivalika explained, that we give whatever maximum plus correction it's possible, and we try to give them at least the relaxation and accommodative, as I already explained, therapeutic things. But first, obviously, we will give them a maximum plus correction, and next we have to do the assessment to understand their accommodative demand and how much they require, like accommodation and relaxation, entire thing, and then we have to go for the management.
And just to confirm, what management is it again you're talking about?
When we give any kind of accommodative relative issues, we are having different kind of vision therapies that we give. So first, already we discussed that first treatment is the glasses, whatever refractive error they are having. Either presbyope, we have to give the correction for distance, near, whatever. And then we have to start off, because see, accommodation and convergence are correlated. So when we are managing accommodative relative issues, we have to give convergence exercises also. Accommodation is not going to go alone, and convergence is not going to go alone. Both we should do together management. So we are not giving all hi-fi instruments, and it's not possible to give everyone hi-fi instruments. So at least a basic distance to near, looking from far to near, and Shivalika already explained 20/20 rules. Then our simple pencil push-up exercises, So something like that we need to give for each and every patient. But when it comes to a high level of treatment and all, we will segregate in accommodative relative like diagnosis and convergence relative diagnosis. And first we will work on their we will relax their accommodation together with their Virgin's demand, and then we will manage Virgin's with accommodation, and slowly we will progress.
Shivalika, you want to add anything on it in terms of orthoptic
Yeah,
management?
sure. One thing that we usually see in this digital eye strain area, the prevalence of the binocular vision disorder that has increased is your accommodative spasm for children and young adults, and acquired esotropia because they're sitting on the screen for a longer period of time. So in this case, you wouldn't just require to give, as Pooja already said, few exercises at home. You would need a very aggressive treatment for this. And on adding, this is another thing where you need an aggressive treatment. But for somebody who's just had, few very not very severe type of digital eye strain, I would rather than just adding pencil push-ups, I would add Brock string as an exercise, because that's very simple to do. You can explain it to the patients. You can give an orientation on that. That helps a lot because that's a long string, goes till 6 meters if you want it to be. So 3 meters basically we give, and we explain them how to do the exercise, and most of the patients do benefit from it. And for accommodation, what Pooja is saying, shifting their gaze from near to distance, for that there's an instrument called Heart Chart, HART, Heart Chart, which has letters on it. It's for distance as well as for near, and you simply ask the patients to read one line from near and then one line from distance, and just shift their gaze one by one. That can be done monocularly as well as binocularly.
Yeah, thanks for adding those points. They look like they're very important points to know.
Yes.
All the panelists, do you want to add anything? Do you want to sum up some important points before I have take the questions from my side and the audience?
I think we just need to elicit good history. I mean, keeping this also in mind, not that, all patients who come in not with digital eye strain, but we should also keep this in mind, and probably eliciting proper history is important, and a comprehensive eye examination. Outside, usually in practices, most of the people do not use a slit lamp, but at least a torchlight examination should be done, and ask questions more related to the problems that they face, like based on the classification that we just have learned, the 4 different categories. And then also, while if we identify that they have these problems, and if they have meibomian gland dysfunction, or say dry eye, or maybe borderline tears, or decreased tear meniscus. So most important is counseling on ergonomical and environmental factors that would influence this digital eye strain. And for temporary purposes, we can suggest artificial tears, and we shall of course suggest the 20-20-20 rule, and lubricants for for a short span of time. But we should actually identify the cause for that, and probably try to alleviate those problems. Then asking them to increase the blink rate is most important, and avoid making the room dark while using these systems, and do not use laptops especially on their chest while they lie down on the sofa and try to work. So that is the most common thing that people do, and simultaneously watch televisions, so that should be decreased. And as other panelists and colleagues are telling about that, we should be mindful of correcting the refractive error appropriately, consider a near induced transient myopia, and then consider to give accommodative and convergence related exercises. I think these all are things related to it. Maybe if I have missed anything specific, rest of the panelists can add to that.
I just want to add one more point that when other places they are giving spectacle or prescribing spectacle. So if RF ruler is not there, also we can do a quick NPA and NPC that will help us to understand that we are missing any other points or not in in the term of giving our glasses, because sometimes patient comes with troubleshooting of they're having small phobias for near or distance, and we are missing. So if we can do a quick NPA NPC instead of we are not going for further tests because it's not available maybe at their centers, or a quick NRA PRA, because NRA PRA require basically a trial box, that's it. And Maddox is also there all the time in every trial box. So a Maddox test to find the phoria. So it will be like great if we can do this 2-3 things we can add on our regular routine practices. The practice will be more comprehensive.
That's a great point, Pooja. Thanks for adding.
As Srikanth said, whatever other than refraction, try to include the slit lamp examination. I precisely say evaluation of dry eye is very important for optometrists to understand the patient. There are many neurotropic conditions without any symptoms. They just come to your clinic saying discomfort. So we need to assess those patients, because if we don't address, they go into depression on a lot of other second opinions to different people. I think optometrist plays a vital role in just handling these important things.
Okay. Thanks, Kiran, for adding that. Just to elaborate, when Pooja was mentioning the near point of convergence and near point of accommodation, just for the participants who are just got into optometry. Anything, Shivalika, you want to add?
I think everybody summed up everything nicely. Only thing I would like to add is like computer vision syndrome is an umbrella term, not to just streamline it to non-strabismic binocular vision disorders, because that's what people do. Suddenly somebody's coming with discomfort and you think, oh, there's a binocular vision disorder, it's out of our specialty, send it there. So thinking, as Srikanth said, that history taking is very important in any of the eye examination, not just diagnosing it as computer vision syndrome, but it's important in any of the eye examination. But streamlining the process of your workup should start from taking history itself. Okay, the patient might tell you a lot of things. The more questions you ask, you will get more clarity on what you have to do next. So just a comprehensive examination. When I say comprehensive examination, people think it's only refractive error and all. No, comprehensive examination includes all the specialties. So as an optometrist, you don't be a special optometrist. An optometrist comprises of all the things, be it low vision, contact lenses, binocular vision disorder. No, I think comprehensive examination is a mixture of all this. That's how you'll be able to manage your patient better, and you will be able to tell that, okay, this patient has this problem, I need to send this patient here. Okay, if it's a dry eye, you send it to ophthalmologist. If it's a contact lens related, you give the contact lens. So I think comprehensive examination, comprehensive approach is important in diagnosing as a person with having digitalized eye strain, not just binocular vision. Let me put that out there.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Shivalika. I'm actually no expert in digital eye strain, so I have a quick question for you. When you mentioned non-strabismic conditions, what did you mean?
So non-strabismic binocular vision disorders is what I said. So this means your binocular vision disorders which are related to your accommodation and vergence, including your convergence as well as divergence. It not necessarily not necessarily your patient has to has esotropia, manifest or exotropia. Somebody who has intermittent or latent tropias or phorias will come with these problems, non-strabismic binocular vision disorder. So to list out, this consists of convergence insufficiency, convergence excess, accommodative insufficiencies, any type of dysfunctions relating to your accommodation and vergence only will be your non-strabismic binocular vision disorders. And these are mostly treated with vision therapy. Depending upon the severity, we can also try prism prescription for it.
Okay. Thanks for answering that quick question. Yeah, so as I said, like I'm no expert in digital eye strain. This is something like very new to me. So I've been researching on my own to prepare for this discussion. So I found several unfounded theories circulating across social media, internet, and in all other platforms. So I have few questions for all the panelists here. So there are different schools of thought for about the 2020 rule of exercise. Can you tell us what is this rule and how effective it is? I know Srikanth was mentioning in his sum up notes when he swiftly moved on to the next points, but if there is something that we want to know about 2020 rule and how effective it is.
So 2020 rule is basically you ask the person who's working on computer system for a longer time to take breaks for 20 seconds after 20 minutes. And for those 20 seconds, they have to look 20 feet away, that is far away. So the idea or the, thought behind this is that when you are looking for near, when you're working, when you're doing a near work, your accommodation is active, your convergence is active. And if you are going to use your convergence as well as accommodation for a longer period of time, you might as well give a break in between. Okay, so it's basically increasing your agility to accommodate. So if our lens is supposed to be like this, and when we are when your lens accommodates, its increases in size, its curvature increases, right? So just to release that strain in the eye, if I might say it in a layman term, just to release the strain in the eye for that fewer seconds is your idea behind 2020 rule. It's basically to increase the agility of your accommodation.
Great, thank you.
So that you are able to, do that properly.
Okay, great. To other panelists too. So does a digital eye strain affect the people who wear corrective eyewear, and how different it affects the people who wear contact lenses? From your experience of clinical practice that you've been doing all these years.
Yeah, Nandini, as such, there is not many, but quite different approach for contact lens wearer. But anybody coming to reporting saying that we do have all high water content lenses, but some people come to tend to saying a lot of dryness issues. So try to put them in a practitioner replacement program where we try to give low decay lenses. So that meant for 1 year conventional approach, but we try to give them every 3 months approach. That way, otherwise we need to put on constant artificial tears with high decay lenses also. So it's based to patient to patient. We need to design approach for them contact lenses.
Contact lens wearers themselves, they are like more prone to dryness and other symptoms, right? So are they more at risk to have digital eye strain?
Some patients do aggravate actually, but not every patients are not contraindicated, to be frank actually. So it's one of the modality, but however, some patients do have a lot of sensitivity with after wearing contact lens and complain of dryness, discomfort. So probably try them, low decay lenses would help them to avoid perevaporation basically.
Great, thanks for clearing that out, Kiran. Can also one of the panelists explain if there is any medical management? I think you already mentioned artificial tears is a good option for that, right? And how about vision therapy? How effective it is for children and how effective it is for adults?
Yeah, vision therapy is quite effective for children as well as adults, because when we do any kind of vision therapy, as already we discussed and mentioned, first their proper true glass correction, and then we start off vision therapy. We will manage like accommodative and convergence related issues together. So suppose I'm taking it as a convergence insufficiency. If the child or the adult means like diagnosed with convergence insufficiency, so they will have a small amount of phoria. So if they are wearing the glasses, myopic correction correction, the phoria, they're controlling with the help of the glasses. And if you're removing the glasses, adults after LASIK and all, the phoria gets aggravated and they will come up the complaint of eye strain, headache, or they will complain of my vision is getting blurred, I'm getting glare at night, and all those things. So that in that all cases, we give them, as Shivalika explained, we give them basic exercises like Brock strings, and then we will give them Lifesaver cards, eccentric circles and all. And Lifesaver cards we can use for convergence related issues as well as divergence related issues. Then when it comes to office based exercises, we prescribe them giving tunnel cliff exercises. Then we will use aperture ruler, we will use different vision therapy softwares for them. And with that, we will use different flippers, either it accommodative flippers or Vergence flippers to get rid of Vergence related issues. We use majorly Vergence flipper. Sometimes what we do to make the exercises more complicated, with Brock string, we use different kind of Vergence flippers. Then we give hard chart to switch their accommodation from distance to near. So there is different mode of treatment, how we do. And first, whenever we start off giving any binocular vision related anomalies treatments, first we should know what is the exact diagnosis of the patient. Is it a divergence sufficiency, it's a convergence sufficiency, or it's an excess? Depends upon that we should do the management. It should not that all the patients are getting same kind of management in binocular vision. So we should know what is exact diagnosis, and depending upon that we should do the management.
I have one more question, this very simple question. So the management for computer vision syndrome, is it like completely treatable? Like when you start your therapy, it's treated, and if we stop in between, does it come back? Or is it like diabetes? It's like once you have it, it's going to stay with you for your lifelong.
No, it's not like that. Yeah, when we treat, see, as Shivalika explained, it's not only that we have to give only binocular, we have to focus only on binocular vision related issues. We need to see dry eye part, then we need to see refractive error part, entire thing. And when it comes to finally to binocular vision and related issues, and it comes to us for binocular vision therapies, it's not that we are giving in 20, this whatever we follow at Narayan Nethralaya, like 24 days of therapy and then tapered off. We can't stop the therapy suddenly. It can reverse back. So we basically slowly tapered the exercises, how we tapered the patching, and then slowly we stop the exercises. When we do home-based therapies also, we follow the same plan. We don't stop immediately. Or see, who all are computer users, they are going to use this for lifelong, correct? So if we can give them some supportive exercises like daily one time or something like that, using a CAT card or a Brock string or something, so that will help them. But it is not lifelong.
Okay. So we have to continue the therapy whenever they have the symptoms, or start the therapy when.
Yeah, they can, but it's better to maintain the therapy throughout the thing, because it keep on starting and then stop and again start. It's not going to help them. So they are going to be in computers for a long time. So just a blink, just as already all the panelists explained, a blinking rate, 20-20 rules and all, if they follow, that is okay first after giving this 24 or 30 days of session or 15 days of sessions.
The approach would be, again, we need to quantify it actually, digitalized strain, like what mild, moderate, severe kind of thing. So based on, if you want to have mild, I think where there are very transient, once we give, refractive error glasses or what are office lenses or, artificial tear, they'll just subside. But again, the patient education is quite important to, does not repeat it again. But again, what Pooja and Shivalika, once they have binocular vision anomalies or Vergence issues, they need to have a close follow-up until that it gets subsided.
You want to add anything?
To add to that, making it a little easier to understand, vision therapy, if I would go ahead and compare it, would be sort of like steroid usage. When you give after cataract surgery or something, you taper it off till everything becomes a little normal. So when you give vision therapy for those particular, it's aggressive. As Pooja said, she gives like 20-25 sessions. It's aggressive for those sessions. Suddenly, when you stop it, there are high chances of it reverting back to the normal position, back to what it was before. So doing that 25 sessions of aggressive vision therapy and suddenly stopping there, your eye system would get confused. I was just exercising, just tagged in, and now suddenly I've stopped. What just happened? So let me go back to my digitalized chain era. condition. So vision therapy works in that way that you give it aggressively, then you taper it off slowly, till the patient is able to maintain their, um, accommodation and virgins on their own as they're supposed to, as compared with a normal person.
I have one more question. This is related to the ophthalmic lenses. Probably, Shrikant, you might give a better explanation for me. So in terms of blue filter, I know the market is talking about how good blue filter is and how bad it can be. So what do you recommend? Because I think most of the screens, laptops now, they consider this. Okay, when they market, they already tell you like, no, this is healthy for your eyes. This is not the wavelength that's harmful. So how true is this information?
Of course, screens also come with blue light filtering option, that way you can just click night mode and then that cuts all the blue. But what about when you step out of the room, or when you are not using gadgets and when you are under sunlight? So, I mean, if at all, if you have to believe that blue light affects your eyes, and actually speaking, the vulnerable ones would be those who are, nicotine addicted individuals, alcoholics, and diabetic patients, hypercholesterol, and people already having AMD. So these people with AMD and where the lipofuscin gets accumulated, and when they get exposed to blue light, so that would definitely have its effect on it. So even of course, when it is useful for young adults and population who are not into that vulnerable category, I mean, it is no harm in wearing that. So as I said, that it can still act like an anti-reflective coated lens. And if any research proves that, blue light filtering lenses actually help in, retinal phototoxicity of the cells and all. So that time you feel happy about what you're wearing. Otherwise, you consider that you're wearing anti-reflective coated lenses. And for these vulnerable patients, and even it's not that only young adults or people until 40 years of age, or maybe only school going children or homeschooling because of the pandemic, that only from children to young adult or middle age group people are using. Not only that, even the senior citizens are also using gadgets nowadays. If they do not know, or if they are not into this usage of gadgets, but they learn to connect with their kids who are living abroad, and they spend a lot of time on a screen talking to their children or grandchildren. So in that point of view, we should again suggest them this, if they are into that vulnerable category, I think we should be suggesting them.
Shrikant, I have one question for you, because there are a lot of reports saying that blue filters and the photochemical damage. But what is the take on the kids? What should we try to dispense them with blue filter, or how does it help?
Now, if that is associated with myopia, the concept is different, because in order to arrest the progression of myopia, again there are some reports which say that blue light actually help in preventing myopia progression. So in that per se, it is a little tricky or challenging for us to take a call on that. But to start with, a good anti-reflective coating is a must for kids, is what I would recommend. But again, as we advance with our research, and when we get a concrete results, I think until then we should be little diplomatic in suggesting, as I was saying, that where only when vulnerable conditions are there, we should probably counsel them the importance of blue light filtering. But otherwise, even those blue light filtering lenses, when you suggest or recommend, predominantly you would talk about the benefits of anti-reflective coat, or the benefits that they reap with that. For kids, I think we can still hold on taking that, considering that blue light filtering is a must as of now, is my take on that. But if anyone has any evidence saying that it is a must, I think they should probably share that with us, and probably we would follow that in practice. But what is important is, especially when it comes to kids and correcting the error, and also when they are using gadgets, if they have refractive error, most of the parents would not consider to go for a good pair of spectacle lenses. But we should again counsel and recommend them the importance of wearing anti-reflective coating, because that is the time that probably that vision is maturing. If they are just into using and around 7 or 8 years of age, where they still, other thing that we forgot discussing about is video games that kids play, or even most of the adults play. So when we actually are on that, especially the refresh rate is very, very important, and also blink rate, so that would reduce to 25 to 30% of reduction of blink rate from the basal blink rate of the individual. So those things are very important, and we should counsel them that anti-reflective coating lenses would enhance the contrast and avoid unnecessary reflections that would come off from the surface of the spectacle lens otherwise, and also from the screen. So we should recommend those, at least a sophisticated coating, multi coatings that are available, and that again more or less matches with the cost of the blue filtering lenses. So it's okay if the parents choose any of that.
I think blue filter is like a very hot topic now, and it's trending. We should plan one day for next session just on blue filters.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, the session has been very productive. Yeah, I'll just take questions from the participants for next 15 minutes. Hope it's okay for all the panelists, because I know that we exceeded the time. Is it okay?
Let us take few quick questions that are maybe you can consolidate those all questions into specific ones, and then we probably can address.
So there were a point Joel Baksh mentioned when we were talking about cycloplegic refraction. So is it okay if we can prescribe or do a duochrome test to give us a more information about undercorrection?
Yes, actually, we can do that. In case your cycloplegic refraction you're not able to do, doing a duochrome test will let you know of the undercorrection or an overcorrection. Now, this being said, you have to keep in mind one thing, that if the person is coming to you with a computer vision syndrome, and that person has come to you at a state of micro fluctuations that are happening in the accommodation, the patient might accept over minus and still report read better. So there have been chances, scenarios where that has happened, and after doing the cycloplegic refraction, I had seen the patient accepting a lesser minus, and then later in PMT saying green better on that particular lens, when the patient said that they were read better in the first visit. So having duochrome does gives us an idea of if there's an undercorrection or an overcorrection, but I wouldn't depend too much on it. Just to be confirming their refractive error in order to prescribe them spectacles. If the patient doesn't allow to do cycloplegic refraction, if cycloplegic refraction is not possible, the other method that you can do to check for undercorrection or overcorrection would be doing a dynamic retinoscopy. So doing a dynamic retinoscopy over the prescription that you have prescribed to the patient would give you an idea of undercorrection or overcorrection of your prescription that you have given. And I would also advise you to do a Borish delayed fogging rather than doing just a normal fogging to help relax accommodation better to get the best out of your subjective refraction.
Hope that answered your question. And we also had a few questions about the flipper. I think during our conversations before, Pooja was mentioning how to use flippers with correction and without correction if the symptoms are still there. So I hope, Rekam, your question is answered during our discussion. We have one more question about, does the screen size have an impact on the severity or onset of asthenopic symptoms? anybody?
Yeah, yes, definitely. The smaller the screen size, the text would be smaller and closer you keep. So definitely it would have its impact. And when you keep it closer, more light is actually hitting your eye. So which means more problem again. And you, when more closer you keep, you actually have your eye declination or head declination more, and that would actually cause a lot of neck pain. So screen size would definitely matter.
Okay, Mr. Sharma, I think the second part of your question is just answered. I think to use a laptop is much more easier for children because of the screen size. And Shrikant, how about changing the background light? I know we can change the background light from black to white. Does it change?
In the sense on the screen?
On the screen, yes.
Okay. So yes, usually for text reading, again, literature recommends around 500 lux of light. Again, the contrast is perceived to be good with the white background, but again, if you use white, even all the gadgets that we use are self-illuminating. So if you actually can reverse the polarity, that means having black background and having white text, that would definitely soothe your eyes, and it would be very pleasing to your eyes for reading. So this can actually be done, especially most of us when we do presentations, we actually take a white background most of the time, and that actually would be very glary if at all, if you're presenting through projectors or even otherwise through any gadget. So background definitely would affect, and it reduces a lot of glare related issues, and exposure to bright light can also be decreased by choosing a soothing background color.
It also comes to my mind about low vision people. How does that change the scenario?
I mean, choosing the backgrounds and all.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, this depends on what kind of pathology they have. But if it is macular related, definitely contrast related and color vision related are there. So for them, I think black and white backgrounds would actually give more contrast. Again, whatever they feel comfortable by changing the polarity, they can choose. So that is what with the basic knowledge that I have with regards to low vision. But anyone who is practicing or who is into that during their formal training recently can actually comment on that.
Just to add to that, Nandini, for low vision people with low vision, for patients with low vision, choosing the polarity would totally depend upon their pathology. So nowadays electronic devices which come with the option of changing the polarity, be it black background or white background, or be it blue on yellow or yellow on blue. So these are the options that are provided now in the electronic magnifiers that comes with the new electronic devices. So that can be chosen for them. They can choose it whichever is comfortable for them. So if they have glare issues, they would prefer a black background with the reverse polarity. And if their contrast is such as in macular disorders, they might prefer yellow on blue, or sometimes white background with a better contrast letters, black letters.
Yeah, thanks, Shivalika, to adding that point. We have one more question from Stephen. I think he was asking about the proper lighting conditions when we are using gadgets. So during our conversations, Shrikant was mentioning about how to use an overhead lamp and to avoid a direct light coming to your eyes, and what type of light to recommend. Do you want to add to that question, Shrikant?
Yeah, I mean, usually when we use LEDs, it is too bright. So in such case, we can use luminaires, which can actually diffuse the light. And also we should make sure that the diffusers that you use would not again directly reflect off the surface of the screen. So there should not be much of that. So when you just change the position of the light source with that luminaires, and also if required changing the workstation or where you sit and work with the system. So those things would take care of that, and that's how you can decrease the indirect reflectance of light.
Thanks, Shrikant. Hopefully that answered the question. For Virendranath, I think you were asking about the scientific literature on the blue filters and myopia progression. Thanks, Joel Bucks, for answering his question. You saved some time for me.
Saw that.
you saved like 10 seconds of my time, so thank you. And if you don't have any other questions, we have one participant who wants to add something. Mr. Ajit, do you want to talk? Please go ahead.
Hi, it would just be for 30 seconds. Number one, you can use cyclopentolate so that it reduces the time, and you can put the drops in the evening. By tomorrow morning, everybody would have full accommodation on, and you would not have a problem doing the refractions with cycloplatics. Number two is regarding using larger devices. Many affluent homes nowadays have projectors, and there is a very simple thing to have connectors connected to your mobile or laptop or whatever, and when you project, there is no direct light, then it becomes indirect light or reflected light, and a lot of issues get reduced even when you keep that projector on a very short distance, so that it is just like 14 inches or 15 inches, and the level of concentration I have observed increases much more, and there is a lot of help. Thirdly is regarding background. Of course, you should have a black background, because if you have so many letters on white against black background, the total luminance coming onto your eyes.
I think there's been a poor connection, but that was great points from Mr. Ajit. If he comes back, I would definitely like to know where his clinical practice setup is, so we can get more information in what kind of patients or subjects he might be seeing. But thank you, Ajit, for mentioning those points. Any other questions?
As this is conducted by alumni of L. Prasad Eye Institute, I would say that Ajit Limaye is again going to come as a guest speaker in the upcoming eye optometry education program. So I take the liberty to tell that he is available on 3rd of August, morning 9 to 10.
Would it be okay to speak, or should I?
Yeah. Go on.
You should ask parents not to use their gadgets, so that the kids follow the instincts, and they should make a conscious effort to make things more attractive than the gadgets to play with. Finally, human being is a social animal, and if you make your children sit in front of computers and you do not play with them, they are going to get addicted to the devices. It is better that you yourself detach from the gadget and play with your kids, talk to them, so that they are away from the gadgets for most of the times. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the insight, sir.
Yeah, I think that's definitely your experience speaking, Mr. Ajit. I can say that. But that's a bigger problem on the whole, to leave the digital screen in the digital era. But definitely, we'll try. Yeah. Mr. Ajit, yeah, I have a personal question. I just want to know what kind of clinical practice setup you have now. Yes.
I think I will be on screen on Tuesday. Right now, I am at my home, so I should be able to show you around. I have 3 refraction units where my assistants and fellow doctors investigate and treat and approach and see the patients. And we have our own surfacing lab, our fitting unit, our dispensing unit. We have a manufacturing of optical and few non-optical low vision aids and a hair screen and others, so that we have a manufacturing unit, we have a hospital to run, and those are the few things which I have, apart from others like attachment to a refracting surgery and so on and so forth.
If we don't have any questions from the participants, we can sum up our discussion. Thank you all for taking time. I know we exceeded, but thanks for your patience. You've been very kind to all the participants and to me. Thanks to explain all the questions about digital eye screen. I hope you all found this session informative, and much more informative sessions are coming up in our Broaden Your Horizons. And stay tuned and take care. Stay safe and healthy.